Rain lashed against the 40th floor window, streaking the glass like tears. Wei Chen looked up from the smudge he was scrubbing off a conference room door. He recognized her immediately, Mei Lin, the CEO. Her photo hung in the main lobby, polished and commanding. In person, her tailored suit was razor-sharp, but her eyes betrayed a raw panic that didn't belong in this gleaming corporate tower. "I need you to pretend you're his dad for an hour," she said, her voice tight, almost breathless. Wei's hand paused on the rag. He was the night janitor, invisible to the suits who ruled these floors. "I'm sorry," he asked, his tone soft but steady. 1 hour, Mei repeated, her gaze flicking toward the boardroom doors. "Hana Sato, the board chair, is here for a final review. She insisted on meeting my family." Wei followed her glance. A small boy, maybe 7, stood half-hidden behind her, clutching a stuffed panda like it was his anchor in a storm. He wore a stiff blazer, too big for his frame, and stared at the floor, utterly still. "My husband, he couldn't make it," Mei said, the lie brittle and transparent. Wei knew there was no husband. The whole building knew. He looked from the CEO to the boy, piecing it together. This was a performance, and she needed a stand-in. "Why me?" he asked, his voice calm but searching. Mei's eyes softened for a fraction of a second. "I saw you last week in the lobby with your son. You were helping him with his backpack. You looked like you knew what you were doing." The unspoken hung heavy between them, and I don't. A cold weight settled in Wei's chest. This felt wrong. He was a father, a real one. It was the only title that mattered to him, more than the job that kept him mopping floors at midnight. Pretending felt like a betrayal of his own son, Kai. He shook his head slightly, a silent refusal. Mei's panic flared. "I'll pay you," she blurted. "Your salary for a year. Name your price." Wei's jaw tightened. He looked past her to the boy, whose small shoulders were rigid with tension. This wasn't about a CEO's contract anymore. It was about the child caught in the middle of her storm. "It's not about money," he said firmly, meeting her gaze. He was just the janitor, but in this moment, he held the power. He let the silence stretch, then gave a reluctant nod. "Okay. 1 hour." Mei's relief was palpable, she nearly slumped against the wall. "Thank you. His name is Liang. We call him Li. Just, pretend you adore him." "No," Wei said, his voice stopping her cold. He stepped past her and crouched to the boy's level, ignoring Mei entirely. "Hey, Li," he said softly. The boy flinched, then slowly raised his eyes. They were wide, sharp, and far too perceptive for a child. Wei nodded toward the stuffed animal. "That's a fierce-looking panda." Li's grip tightened on the toy. "His name is Bao," he whispered. "Bao," Wei repeated, as if it were critical intel. "A panda named Bao must be a loyal protector." Li gave the tiniest nod. Wei glanced up at Mei, who stood frozen, watching them with something like awe. "One condition," he said, his voice low and unwavering. "For the next hour, you follow my lead. No suggestions, no interruptions. My way." Mei, the CEO who commanded boardrooms, stared at the man in the plain gray uniform dictating terms. She was out of moves. "Okay," she said. Wei turned back to Li. "All right, Li. We're going to meet a woman named Hannah. It'll be boring, so let's make a secret game. If I tug my right ear, it's your turn to tell her about Bao. Deal?" A spark, not a smile, but something alive, flickered in Li's eyes. He nodded. Wei stood and offered his hand. After a brief hesitation, a small hand slipped into his, delicate but trusting. Wei's calloused fingers closed gently around it. He looked at Mei. "Ready?" She wasn't, but she straightened her jacket, slipping back into her CEO mask. Together, the three of them approached the boardroom doors. The hour had begun. Mei pushed open the heavy teak doors. The boardroom was a sleek expanse of glass and dark wood, dominated by a table that could double as a runway. At the far end, framed by a floor-to-ceiling window showcasing the rain-soaked city, sat Hana Sato. She was in her late 60s, her silver hair swept into an elegant bun, her smile polite but razor-sharp. She didn't look like a predator, but Wei knew a hunter of weakness when he saw one. "Mei," Hannah said, her voice smooth as silk. "And this must be the famous Liang." Mei forced a bright smile. "Hannah, thank you for waiting. This is my partner, Wei." Hannah's gaze slid to Wei, taking in his simple work pants and cotton shirt, so out of place among the tailored suits and polished leather. Her perfectly arched eyebrow lifted. "Mr. Chen," she said, her smile tightening. "Mei has kept you quite the secret." Wei felt a slight squeeze from Li's hand and gave a reassuring one in return. "I prefer to stay out of the spotlight," he said evenly, offering no excuses for his appearance, just a fact. "A prudent choice," Hannah said, though her eyes gleamed with scrutiny. "Please, sit." They settled across the polished table. Mei sat stiffly, while Wei turned his attention to Li, adjusting the boy's chair to make sure he was comfortable. It was a small, instinctive gesture, and Mei felt a pang of envy watching it. So, Liang, Hannah began, leaning forward, your mother says you're quite the artist. What's your latest creation? Li froze, his eyes darting to Mei, then to Wei. Panic crept into his expression. Wei tugged his right ear. Li's gaze locked on the signal, and he took a shaky breath, clutching Bao tighter. Bao, he mumbled. I'm sorry? Hannah asked, leaning closer. His name is Bao, Li said, a little louder this time, holding up the stuffed panda. He's a giant panda. They can eat up to 40 pounds of bamboo a day. Their paws have an extra bone that acts like a thumb to grip better. The room fell silent. Mei stared, stunned. She had never heard her son speak so confidently to a stranger, let alone string together facts like that. Hannah Sato looked genuinely impressed. Is that so? A well-informed protector. You must have inherited your mother's sharp mind for details. Her gaze shifted to Wei. And what about your father, Liang? Does he share your passion for nature? Before Li could tense up, Wei answered smoothly. I'm more about how things hold together. Li's the one who figures out the why. He gave the boy a small, warm smile. We balance each other out. A balance? Hannah echoed, testing the word. That's important. And what is it you do, Wei? How do you contribute to this balance? The question was a trap. Mei's grip tightened on her pen, her knuckles paling. Wei didn't flinch. I work for this company, he said simply, meeting Hannah's piercing gaze. I keep the building running smoothly. Make sure everything's in place for the work to happen. It was the truth, vague and unadorned. He was the janitor, but his steady delivery made it sound like he oversaw operations, a vital cog in the corporate machine. Hannah nodded slowly, picturing a facilities manager, a role both essential and discreet. His quiet confidence sold it completely. An indispensable job, she said, her tone approving. A company is like a family, it's only as strong as its roots. She smiled at Li, a real one this time. Your father is a wise man. Mei exhaled, unaware she'd been holding her breath. They were pulling it off. Wei was pulling it off. His calm, grounded presence was a better shield than any polished lie she could have crafted. For the next 20 minutes, Wei steered the conversation with the ease of someone who'd spent years navigating his daughter's bedtime stories. He sidestepped Hannah's trickier questions with honest anecdotes about fatherhood, drawn from his life with Kai, building blanket forts in their cramped apartment, teaching him how to fix a wobbly bike wheel. When Li started to retreat into himself, Wei tugged his right ear, and the boy would share another fact about pandas or his latest robotics project, his voice growing steadier each time. Wei was building a connection with Li right there in the boardroom, and all of Mei's wealth and influence felt like ash in comparison. Finally, Hannah glanced at the sleek clock on the wall. This has been delightful. It's clear you have a stable, grounded home life, Mei. It puts my mind at ease. She began gathering her papers. I was especially pleased to hear you've set up a proper office for Wei here at the building. A man needs his own space. Mei's smile froze. A chill ran through her. Wei's expression didn't waver, but he felt Li's hand stiffen in his. Hannah stood, her eyes glinting with that same sharp curiosity. In fact, why don't we stop by it? Liang, you can show me that sketch you made, the one your mother said you framed for your father's desk. The air turned brittle. Mei's smile was a fragile veneer, threatening to shatter. An office. A sketch. She'd tossed those details into a pre-meeting brief for Hannah, a careless flourish to paint her fictional family life. She never imagined they'd be called to account. Her mind raced for an excuse, a renovation, a last-minute relocation, but anything she said now would sound desperate, hollow. Before she could speak, Wei's calm voice cut through the tension like a steady hand on a tiller. Actually, Hannah, he said, his tone polite but authoritative, as if addressing a routine maintenance issue. He stood, subtly positioning himself between Hannah and the door. I'm glad you're here. There's something I noticed on my way in that I'd like to point out. Hannah paused, her handbag halfway to her shoulder. Oh? What's that? Wei gestured toward the corridor outside. There's a faint watermark on the ceiling tile near the main electrical panel for this floor. With this storm, I'm worried about a potential leak. I'd feel better if I could show you. It'll only take a moment. He spoke with the quiet certainty of a man who knew every bolt and pipe in the building, because he did. The mark was real, he'd flagged it for repair next week. It was a janitor's concern, but in his steady telling, it sounded like a critical operational risk. Hannah's focus shifted instantly. A building issue was a threat to her investment. The twinkle in her eye gave way to sharp concern. A leak near the electrical? That's serious. Yes, please, show me. The office topic vanished. Mei, Li, why don't you wait by the elevators? Wei said, already guiding Hannah out of the boardroom and away from the executive suites. He was steering the most powerful woman in the company with nothing but a janitor's knowledge and a father's resolve. May watched them go, her pulse pounding. She sank into her chair, legs unsteady. She looked at Li, who was staring at the doorway had disappeared through, his expression not fearful but awestruck. "He's really smart," Li whispered. "Yes," May breathed, the word feeling too small. "Yes, he is." Minutes later, Wei returned, his face as calm as ever. "All handled," he said. "I've got my team shutting down the secondary circuit until we can inspect it tomorrow. No risk." May nodded, words failing her. He'd saved them with a lie spun from the truth of his real work. They met Hannah at the elevator bay. She no longer looked at them like a test to be passed but as a competent unit that had handled a crisis. "Thank you, Wei," she said, pressing the call button. "Your attention to detail is a credit to this company. It's clear May and Liang are in good hands, at work and at home." The elevator arrived with a soft ding. Relief flooded May, sharp and overwhelming. The hour was nearly over. They'd made it. Hannah stepped into the elevator, then turned, holding the door. Her smile returned, enigmatic and probing. This was far more insightful than a standard meeting. "We're so glad you could join us," May said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Good," Hannah said, her eyes locking on Wei. "Then you won't mind if my assistant contacts you to arrange a proper dinner at your home. I'm hosting a small group of Singaporean investors next month, and a warm, authentic family meal would be the perfect way to showcase this company's values." Hannah Sato's gaze lingered on Li, "And I absolutely must see that sketch of yours in person." The elevator doors slid shut, sealing her inside with a soft hum. Her reflection flashed briefly in the polished steel, her smile sharp and knowing, before vanishing. The silence in the hallway was deafening, heavy with the weight of what had just happened. May broke it first, her voice a strangled gasp, like someone surfacing after too long underwater. "A dinner," she whispered, turning to Wei, her eyes wide with a fresh wave of panic. "At our home? We don't have a home. She wants to see a sketch that doesn't exist, on a desk in an office you don't have, in a house we don't share. This is a disaster." Wei felt Li's hand tighten in his, the boy flinching at his mother's sharp tone. He knelt immediately, turning his back to May to shield Li from her spiraling fear. "Hey, Li," he said, his voice low and steady, a quiet anchor in the storm. "The secret game's over. You were incredible, the best teammate I could have asked for." He gave Li's hand a warm, reassuring squeeze before letting go. "I need to talk to your mom about some boring grown-up stuff now. Can you go with her assistant and draw me a picture of Bao fighting a bamboo monster? I want to see how tough he is." Li's eyes flicked from Wei's calm face to May's frantic one. He nodded, the mission giving him a spark of purpose. May, snapped out of her panic by Wei's words, fumbled for her phone and dialed her assistant. "Lin, I need you outside the boardroom. Take Li to my office. Now." Her voice was tight, barely holding together. When the assistant arrived and led Li away, May's composure cracked. She paced the marble corridor, her heels clicking in a frantic rhythm. "It's over. I'm finished. A dinner with investors? This is a test, and I've failed." She ran a hand through her sleek hair, musing it. "I have to call her. Say there's a family emergency. But what happens when she reschedules? What then?" Wei's voice cut through her unraveling monologue, calm and measured. "What happens when she sends a gift to your home address and finds a penthouse with no trace of a family?" May stopped pacing. She stared at him, her face pale. "Then what do you suggest?" "You heard her. This isn't an hour anymore. This is. I don't even know what this is." "I know," Wei said. The deal had been for 1 hour. That hour was up. He could walk away, back to his quiet life, Kai's crayons scattered on their kitchen table, the smell of jasmine tea in their small apartment. He could leave this powerful, terrified woman to clean up her own mess. But then he thought of Li's small hand in his, the flicker of trust in the boy's eyes during their secret game. Walking away felt like abandoning a child in a storm. "The deal was for an hour," he said, making sure she understood the weight of his choice. "That hour's done." May's face paled further. "I know. I'll triple the money. Whatever you want." "I told you, it's not about money," Wei said, a thread of steel in his voice. He crossed his arms, his stance unyielding. "You have an apartment, don't you?" "Of course I have an apartment," she snapped, her voice brittle. "It's a penthouse 2 miles from here. All glass and chrome. It looks like a showroom, not a home. There's not a single smudge that wasn't left by a maid." "Then we make it a home," Wei said, his words simple but resolute. May stared, bewildered. "What are you talking about?" "How?" "By making it lived in," he said. A real home has mess, scratches on the table, mismatched chopsticks, a kid's drawing taped to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a dumpling. He started thinking aloud, the problem solver in him taking over. We'll need photos. Framed ones, on the walls, on the shelves. A picture of you and Lee at the park. One of me and Lee building a kite. Those photos don't exist? We'll take them. This weekend. We'll need toys that look played with, a half-finished puzzle, a pair of my sneakers by the door. He paused. My life has to be in your apartment. May's expression shifted, a new worry dawning. Your life, she said slowly. Wei, what about your son? Where does he fit in this perfect family? It was the question Wei had been waiting for, the jagged edge of this whole charade. He wouldn't, erase Kai. He looked at Mei, the woman who'd asked him to play the most sacred role in his life for a corporate game. He'd helped her so far. Now she was going to learn something. I'll keep helping you, he said, his voice firm, leaving no room for debate. We'll plan the dinner, but on my terms. All of them. Anything, Mei breathed, clinging to his resolve. Good, Wei said. Because the first step has nothing to do with your penthouse or Hannah's investors. He stepped closer, his gaze locking onto hers. Tonight, after my shift, you're coming with me. You're going to meet my son. You'll sit in my cluttered living room and see Kai's math homework on the counter. He let the words land. If you want me to build you a fake family, Mei, you're going to spend time with a real one first. The drive to Wei's apartment was quiet. Mei sat in the back of her chauffeured sedan, the leather cool against her skin, watching the city shift from sleek skyscrapers to modest brick buildings. Wei sat in the front passenger seat, giving the driver his address in a low, even tone, as if bringing his CEO to his home was just another task. The building was a tidy 3-story walk-up, with neatly trimmed shrubs lining the entrance. It was unapologetically ordinary. When Wei unlocked the door to apartment 3C and flicked on the light, Mei stepped into a world that felt alien. The air smelled of soy sauce and fresh laundry. A pair of small, brightly colored sneakers sat haphazardly by the door, next to Wei's worn work boots. A child's drawing, a wobbly sketch of a dragon, was pinned to a corkboard above a cluttered counter. The living room was cozy but small, anchored by a well-worn couch draped with a slightly frayed woven blanket. A half-finished sketch of a koi fish was taped to the wall, and the coffee table was cluttered with a library book on constellations, a scattering of colorful plastic building blocks, and a chipped ceramic teacup. It was the opposite of May's sterile, white penthouse. It was a home. A small boy with tousled black hair and bright, curious eyes peeked around the corner from the hallway. He had a smudge of blue paint on his nose and wore pajamas printed with cartoon rockets. Baba, you're home, he called, launching himself at Wei, who caught him in a one-armed hug, lifting him effortlessly. Hey, little star, Wei murmured into his hair. Did Mrs. Zhang feed you dinner? Fried rice, the boy announced proudly. Then he leaned around Wei, spotting Mei. His head tilted, eyes narrowing. Who's that? Kai, this is Mei. She's my boss, Wei said simply, setting his son back on the floor. She's going to hang out for a bit. Kai stepped forward, his expression serious. Why are you so shiny? He asked, pointing a soy sauce-stained finger at May's silk blazer. Is it a costume? Mei froze. She'd negotiated billion-dollar deals and faced down corporate sharks, but this child's blunt scrutiny unnerved her. No, it's what I wear for work. Oh, Kai said, clearly unimpressed. He looked at Wei. Does she know we have to finish chapter 3 of the Jade Dragon? She knows it's important, Wei said smoothly, moving toward the tiny kitchen. I'm going to make some tea. Why don't you show Mei your rock collection? Before Mei could object, Kai grabbed her hand, his small fingers surprisingly firm, and tugged her toward a corner where a shoebox overflowed with stones of all shapes and sizes. For the next 10 minutes, Mei found herself sitting on the floor, her tailored suit creasing awkwardly, as Kai lectured her on the difference between agate and obsidian. From the kitchen, Wei watched, not interfering, letting Mei navigate the unpredictable terrain of a child's curiosity. At first, she answered Kai's questions with the clipped precision of a CEO addressing a board member. But then Kai pulled out a smooth, round stone. This one's my favorite, he said, pressing it into Mei's palm. I gave it to Baba for his birthday because it looks like a happy moon. I told him he doesn't have to be sad anymore. Mei stared at the stone. It did look like a crescent moon, faintly smiling. She glanced up and met Wei's eyes over the counter. He gave her a small nod, almost imperceptible. He wasn't just showing her his home, he was showing her his soul. An hour later, Kai was tucked into bed, and the apartment was quiet except for the soft hum of the fridge. Mei sat on the worn couch, a steaming mug of jasmine tea in her hands. For the first time all day, she felt like she could breathe. He's incredible, she said softly. Yeah, Wei agreed, settling into the armchair across from her. He is. A beat of silence, then business. Okay, Wei said, leaning forward. The dinner. Hannah expects a home, a family. What you have is a showroom. We need to change that. For the next hour, they worked. Wei, with a notepad and a pencil, became the strategist, while Mei, for once, took notes. First, the kitchen, he said. Your fridge is empty. We need to stock it, real food, not just takeout containers. A grocery list pinned with a magnet. A stack of unopened mail on the counter. Instant noodle packets, maybe some soy sauce stains. My pantry's organized, Mei said. Everything's in labeled jars. Exactly, Wei said, not looking up. No one lives like that. Next, the living room. That white couch needs a scuff mark. We'll bring this blanket and my armchair, it looks like a dad's chair. You want to move your furniture into my penthouse? Mei asked, incredulous. If you want to sell the lie, yes, Wei said. We'll need toys, blocks, a half-finished board game. And photos. We take them this weekend, you, me, and Lee at the park eating baozi. Normal stuff. He paused, his pencil hovering. Which brings us to Kai. Mei's voice dropped. What do we tell Hannah? The truth, mostly, Wei said. He's my son. You and I are a couple, a blended family. It's complicated but believable. We say we've been together for a year. It explains why she hasn't met me before. The plan was audacious, a fragile web of logistics and deception that could collapse under scrutiny. But as Wei laid it out, piece by piece, it started to feel possible. When they had a rough outline, Mei set her mug down. The tea's warmth had seeped into her hands, but a deeper chill lingered inside her. She looked around the small, love-filled room, the koi fish drawing, the chipped teacup, and a wave of longing for something she'd never known hit her like a tidal wave. Wei, she said, her voice barely audible, the CEO facade gone. How do you do it with Kai? How do you always know what to say? Wei stopped writing. He looked at her, his expression not pitying but quietly understanding. You listen to what they're not saying, he said. And you show up? You keep showing up. He closed the notebook. That's the first lesson, and you're going to learn it with Lee this weekend. The park on Saturday was alive with noise and color. Children shouted on the slides, kites soared above, and the scent of blooming jasmine mingled with grilled street food. It was a universe apart from Mei's climate-controlled penthouse. She felt like an outsider, dressed in a tailored blazer and impractical flats that sank into the damp grass. Okay, Wei said, pulling out his phone. First, we need evidence. He pointed to a gnarled cherry blossom tree. Go stand over there, both of you. Mei and Lee obeyed, standing awkwardly by the tree. Lee clutched Bao to his chest, his expression guarded, uncertain. Right, look like a family, Wei instructed from 10 feet away. Mei, put your arm around him. Maybe smile like you're not closing a corporate deal. Mei draped her arm stiffly over Lee's shoulders. He flinched, clutching Bao tighter. Her smile felt more like a grimace, strained and unnatural. Wei snapped a photo. That's awful, he said bluntly. It looks like you're holding him for ransom. Lee, can you try to look like you're not scared of the strange lady? Wei added, his tone gentle but direct. Lee buried his face in Bao's soft fur. Mei's frustration surged. She could navigate high-stakes boardrooms with ease, but a simple photo with her son felt impossible. They tried again by the lotus pond, then on a park bench. Each shot was worse, stiff, joyless, a gallery of forced moments that screamed inauthenticity. Finally, Wei sighed and pocketed his phone. This isn't working. He looked from Mei's tense expression to Lee's withdrawn one. I'm getting us some Bing Tonghulu. You two talk. He turned and headed toward a vendor cart selling candied fruit skewers, leaving them alone. Panic gripped Mei. The silence between her and Lee was a chasm, vast and daunting. She tried to summon her CEO instincts, to lead the conversation. Lee, she began, her voice clipped and formal, what are your goals for this afternoon? Is there an activity you'd like to pursue? Lee shrank into his jacket, eyes fixed on a crack in the path, and shook his head. The silence returned, heavier, suffocating. Mei felt a sting behind her eyes. She looked at her son, this quiet stranger, and felt only the distance between them. Then Wei's words echoed, listen to what they're not saying. She stopped trying to speak. Instead, she sat on the bench and watched him. She noticed how he rubbed Bao's worn ear in a steady, soothing rhythm. She saw his eyes dart to the playground, lingering on the tallest slide before quickly looking away. He wasn't saying he wanted to try it. He was saying he was afraid. Mei took a breath and tried something different. She didn't ask a question or push. She shared. That slide, she said softly, nodding toward the playground. They call it the Dragon's Back. It's been here since I was a girl. Lee's head tilted slightly, listening. I was terrified of it, she admitted. My father bet me a red envelope with 10 yuan to go down it. I climbed to the top, looked down, and came right back down. Never got that money. Lee looked at her, really looked at her, his guarded expression softening into curiosity. Why were you scared? He asked, his voice barely audible. It felt so high, May said. I thought I'd fall. You can't fall, Lee said matter-of-factly. The sides are 2 feet high. The chance of falling is, like, 0.002%. May blinked. How do you know that? I read the sign, Lee said, pointing to a small plaque at the slide's base. A genuine smile broke across May's face. Well, I didn't have all the data back then. She reached out, not to touch him but to gently tap Bao's nose. Maybe Bao would be brave enough. Bao's not scared of anything, Lee said, a hint of pride in his voice. Just then, Wei returned, holding 3 skewers of glossy, sugar-coated hawthorn berries. He paused, seeing them. They weren't touching, weren't even looking at each other, but they shared a quiet connection, a subtle shift in the air. Without a word, he raised his phone and snapped a photo. In it, May's smile was soft, unguarded, and Lee was looking at her, his face open, engaged. It was the first photo that didn't feel like a lie. The rest of the afternoon felt lighter. They weren't a perfect family, but the ice had cracked. They took more photos, a slightly awkward one feeding koi in the pond, a blurry one of Lee pointing at a duck with the faintest smile. As they walked back to the car, a fragile hope stirred in May's chest. Maybe this wasn't impossible. Maybe she could learn. Then her phone buzzed. She pulled it out. A text from Hana Sato. May, darling, so excited for our dinner party. I've arranged for a top-tier caterer, Wei Ling Chen. She's exceptional. She'll need kitchen access the day of. Her team will send a menu for your approval. We must ensure it's perfect for our Singaporean partners. Talk soon. May's blood ran cold. A caterer in her kitchen. The lie was sprouting roots, branches, and a team of culinary experts. She looked from the phone to Wei's calm face, the hope from the park dissolving into dread. A caterer, she said flatly, reading the text aloud to Wei in the car. Wei Ling Chen. She's not just a chef, she's a legend. She'll walk into my kitchen, see a fridge with nothing but a jar of pickled radish, and know. She'll know no one lives there. Lee, strapped into his booster seat in the back, glanced from his mother's panicked face to Wei's steady one. Wei didn't flinch. He processed the new information with the same calm he'd used to redirect Hannah earlier. Okay, he said after a moment. It's a new variable. It doesn't change the plan, it just makes the details sharper. Details? May's voice climbed. Wei, my kitchen's a museum. Wei Ling's is a shrine. They're not compatible. Then we make yours compatible, he said, his tone unshakably calm. He turned to the driver. Change of destination. Take us to the market on 10th Street. The driver, accustomed to ferrying May between corporate towers and private jets, glanced at Wei in confusion but complied without a word. The next 2 hours were the strangest of May's life. She found herself navigating the fluorescent aisles of a bustling market on 10th Street, pushing a red cart while the janitor from her company methodically unraveled her sterile existence. No, not that one, Wei said, gently taking a sleek, matte black picture frame from her hands and replacing it with a tacky gold one emblazoned with family moments in curling script. Real families don't always have good taste. He moved through the store like a general plotting a campaign, his choices deliberate and unapologetic. He had her pick out a garish ceramic panda-shaped cookie jar. For the counter, he said. It needs to be visible from the door. A set of mismatched plastic plates with cartoon pandas and dragons. Mix these with your fancy ones. It's called lived-in chaos. And a magnetic whiteboard for the fridge. What's this for? May asked, holding it like an alien artifact. For notes, Wei said. A grocery list, reminders. And this, he grabbed a box of sugary cereal with a grinning cartoon monkey on it. For buying something a nutritionist would faint over. In the home goods aisle, May watched as he selected a set of chunky ceramic mugs. One read, "No tea, no talk." May, who sipped her green tea from delicate porcelain, felt a wave of disorientation. Back at her penthouse, the transformation began. Wei was the director, May his hesitant assistant. First, the fridge, he declared. He placed a carton of milk on the top shelf, left the cereal box open on the counter, and handed May the whiteboard. Write a grocery list. Milk, rice, mangoes, and something a kid would beg for, something you'd never buy. May stared at the board, then wrote in her precise script, red bean mochi. Good, Wei said. He took the park photo, the one where May was smiling softly at Lee, and stuck it crookedly on the fridge with a panda-shaped magnet. He moved through her pristine apartment like an agent of disorder, adding a faint scuff mark by the door, stacking her art books unevenly on the coffee table with a half-empty glass of barley tea on top. From his truck, he brought a box containing his worn armchair, which he set in her living room. It looked like a stray dog among her sleek furniture. He placed a chipped World's Best Baba mug on her quartz island. With each change, the penthouse shed its showroom sheen, becoming something warmer, Messier. Wei hung the tacky family moments frame on a side table, the photo of them by the lotus pond looking oddly at home. Mei watched him work. "Lee," she said softly, almost to herself. "He looked happy today in that photo." "He was," Wei said, not turning around. "You shared something real with him. He wasn't a prop then, just a kid hearing his mom's story." The words landed like a quiet blow. The apartment was ready, a blend of Mei's minimalist elegance and Wei's lived-in warmth. It was a lie, but it was a convincing one. Mei looked around at Wei's armchair beside her sofa, the koi fish drawings taped to the fridge, and felt a strange ache. For the first time in the 8 years she'd lived there, it felt like a home. The doorbell chimed. They both froze. Wei Ling Chen, the caterer, wasn't due until tomorrow. Mei's pulse raced as she opened the door. Standing there was a petite woman in a crisp chef's jacket, her black hair pulled into a severe bun, her eyes sharp and assessing. "Good evening," she said, her voice carrying a faint Singaporean accent. "I am Wei Ling Chen. I was nearby and wished to see the kitchen, to understand its spirit before I begin." She glided into the penthouse before Mei could respond, her gaze sweeping over every detail of their carefully crafted deception. Wei stood by the island, his expression calm but alert. Wei Ling circled the living room, pausing at Wei's armchair. She studied the kitchen island, her eyes narrowing, then stopped at the fridge. She stared at the drawings, the panda magnet, the crooked park photo. Her finger brushed the magnet lightly. She said, her tone unreadable. She turned to them, her face a mask. A family with distinctive taste. Mei's heart lurched. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Wei stepped forward subtly, drawing Wei Ling's attention. "The panda's my son's idea," he said calmly, nodding at the cookie jar. "He thinks every kitchen needs one." Wei Ling's eyes flicked away, taking in his simple work shirt and steady presence. "Ah," she said. "The father. The chaos has a designer." Her gaze swept the room again, not just seeing objects but reading their story. She moved to the pristine Miele stove, running a finger over its gleaming surface. "A remarkable piece," she murmured, then turned to Mei, her eyes piercing. "You must cook for the boy often. What's his favorite dish you make for him?" The question was a blade, sharp and precise. Wei stood still, offering no rescue. This was Mei's moment. Her mind blanked. Dumplings? Fried rice? The answers felt hollow, generic. Mei remembered Wei's words, "Listen to what they're not saying." She thought of Li in the park, of Kai with his moon-shaped stone. What was real? "He loves panda-shaped dumplings," she said, the words feeling strange but true on her tongue. She met Wei Ling's sharp gaze. "But only when Wei makes them. He says I always overstuff them." A heavy silence blanketed the room. Mei braced for the chef's judgment, a knowing smirk. Wei Ling stared at her for a long, agonizing moment. Then she threw her head back and laughed, a rich, vibrant sound that echoed through the penthouse. "Exquisite," she exclaimed, clapping her hands. "A mother who admits she's no chef. This is the heart of a kitchen. It's not technique, it's love. This, I can work with. This has soul." The tension shattered. Mei felt a dizzying wave of relief, so strong she nearly laughed too. They had passed. She had passed. After Wei Ling left, pronouncing the kitchen beautifully imperfect, Mei and Wei stood in the transformed living room, their crafted lie surrounding them. "You were good," Wei said quietly. "I told the truth," Mei replied, a note of awe in her voice. It was easier than lying. The days before the dinner were a whirlwind of preparation. They turned their fake history into a game for Li, calling it secret agent training. Wei would ask, "Agent Li, where did your mom and I have our first date?" Li would giggle and answer, "The noodle stall by the Science Museum." Evenings were spent in Mei's penthouse, rehearsing the rhythms of a life that wasn't theirs. Mei learned Wei took his tea with a splash of milk. Wei discovered Mei secretly loved old wuxia films. Their fortress of lies was built with bricks of small, surprising truths. The night of the dinner arrived. The penthouse glowed with the warm aroma of Wei Ling's braised short ribs and lotus root soup. The lights were dimmed, a half-played game of Go on the coffee table. Li, in a neat sweater, showed Wei a new drawing of Bao. For a fleeting moment, Mei looked at them and felt a sharp ache for this to be real. Wei, comfortable in a borrowed jacket, caught her eye and gave a small, steady nod. They were a team. They were ready. The doorbell chimed. "Showtime." Wei opened the door. Hana Sato stood there, radiant, holding a bottle of premium sake. "It smells divine," she declared, stepping inside. Wei, your home is so full of warmth." "Hana, welcome," Mei said, her voice smooth. "I hope you don't mind," Hana said, turning back to the doorway. I ran into someone on my way up and insisted he join us for a drink before the investors arrive. She smiled brightly. A little reunion. A man stepped into the apartment. He was middle-aged, with a round face and a bureaucratic demeanor Wei recognized instantly, his stomach dropping. It was Jian Lu, the head of human resources. Hannah gestured warmly between them. You remember Jian, don't you, Wei? From your department. Jian's polite smile froze as he looked at Wei. He was the one who'd processed Wei's employment forms, who knew his title was custodial services, his address a modest walk up across town, and his marital status listed as widowed. Jian stared at the janitor posing as the CEO's partner, his mind visibly wrestling with an unsolvable puzzle. The air crackled. Jian's smile wavered, confusion creeping in. He was a man of records and rules, and the data didn't add up. Wei Chen, custodial services, widowed, standing in the CEO's penthouse beside a boy not listed as his dependent. Mei felt her face drain of color. One word from Jian, and their fragile deception would collapse. But Wei didn't give him the chance. He stepped forward, extending his hand with unshakable calm. Jian, good to see you outside the office, he said, his grip firm, his eyes steady. The confident move forced Jian to shake his hand, his mind still scrambling. Wei, yes, you too, Jian stammered. This is unexpected. Mei, spurred by Wei's lead, found her voice. Jian, so wonderful to see you. Wei was just telling me about the great work your team's doing with employee support programs. She flashed a polished smile, linking her arm through Wei's, a gesture that was both performance for Hannah and a desperate anchor for herself. Hannah, oblivious, saw only a warm reunion. So, you two know each other well? She asked Jian. Jian opened his mouth, then closed it, glancing at his CEO clinging to the arm of a man he knew as a janitor. He was cornered. We've crossed paths, he managed. Hannah's sharp gaze turned to Wei. Mei mentioned your background in facilities management. Such a critical role. The question landed like a bomb. This was the moment their lie could unravel. Wei met Jian's eyes briefly, a silent follow my lead, then turned to Hannah, his expression open. Hannah, he said, his voice steady, Mei's been kind about my role. But the truth is, that's not where I started. A deafening silence filled the penthouse. Hannah's smile stiffened. Jian looked like he might collapse. Mei held her breath. When I joined the company, Wei continued, I was in custodial services. The night janitor on the executive floor. That's how Mei and I met. Mei seized the moment, her voice warm, almost genuine. It's true, she said, looking at Wei with practiced affection. I'd see him late at night, working quietly while I was buried in reports. He was so steady, so unaffected by all this. She gestured at the opulent room. He was the most real person I'd ever met. She gave a small, self-deprecating laugh. Mei remembered Wei's words, listen to what they're not saying. She thought of Li in the park, of Kai with his moon-shaped stone. What was real? He loves panda-shaped dumplings, she said, the words feeling strange but true on her tongue. She met Wei Ling's sharp gaze. But only when Wei makes them. He says I always overstuff them. A heavy silence blanketed the room. Mei braced for the chef's judgment, a knowing smirk. Wei Ling stared at her for a long, agonizing moment. Then she threw her head back and laughed, a rich, vibrant sound that echoed through the penthouse. Exquisite, she exclaimed, clapping her hands. A mother who admits she's no chef. This is the heart of a kitchen. It's not technique, it's love. This, I can work with. This has soul. The tension shattered. Mei felt a dizzying wave of relief, so strong she nearly laughed too. They had passed. She had passed. After Wei Ling left, pronouncing the kitchen beautifully imperfect, Mei and Wei stood in the transformed living room, their crafted lie surrounding them. You were good, Wei said quietly. I told the truth, Mei replied, a note of awe in her voice. It was easier than lying. The days before the dinner were a whirlwind of preparation. They turned their fake history into a game for Li, calling it secret agent training. Wei would ask, Agent Li, where did your mom and I have our first date? Li would giggle and answer, the noodle stall by the Science Museum. Evenings were spent in Mei's penthouse, rehearsing the rhythms of a life that wasn't theirs. Mei learned Wei took his tea with a splash of milk. Wei discovered Mei secretly loved old wuxia films. Their fortress of lies was built with bricks of small, surprising truths. The night of the dinner arrived. The penthouse glowed with the warm aroma of Wei Ling's braised short ribs and lotus root soup. The lights were dimmed, a half-played game of Go on the coffee table. Li, in a neat sweater, showed Wei a new drawing of Bao. For a fleeting moment, Mei looked at them and felt a sharp ache for this to be real. Wei, comfortable in a borrowed jacket, caught her eye and gave a small, steady nod. They were a team. They were ready. The doorbell chimed. Showtime. Wei opened the door. Hannah Sato stood there, radiant, holding a bottle of premium sake. "It smells divine," she declared, stepping inside. "Wei, your home is so full of warmth." "Hannah, welcome," May said, her voice smooth. "I hope you don't mind," Hannah said, turning back to the doorway. "I ran into someone on my way up and insisted he join us for a drink before the investors arrive." She smiled brightly. A little reunion. A man stepped into the apartment. He was middle-aged, with a round face and a bureaucratic demeanor Wei recognized instantly, his stomach dropping. It was Jian Lu, the head of human resources. Hannah gestured warmly between them. "You remember Jian, don't you, Wei? From your department." Jian's polite smile froze as he looked at Wei. He was the one who'd processed Wei's employment forms, who knew his title was custodial services, his address a modest walk up across town, and his marital status listed as widowed. Jian stared at the janitor posing as the CEO's partner, his mind visibly wrestling with an unsolvable puzzle. The air crackled. Jian's smile wavered, confusion creeping in. He was a man of records and rules, and the data didn't add up. Wei Chen, custodial services, widowed, standing in the CEO's penthouse beside a boy not listed as his dependent. May felt her face drain of color. One word from Jian, and their fragile deception would collapse. But Wei didn't give him the chance. He stepped forward, extending his hand with unshakable calm. "Jian, good to see you outside the office," he said, his grip firm, his eyes steady. The confident move forced Jian to shake his hand, his mind still scrambling. "Wei, yes, you too," Jian stammered. "This is unexpected." May, spurred by Wei's lead, found her voice. "Jian, so wonderful to see you. Wei was just telling me about the great work your team's doing with employee support programs." She flashed a polished smile, linking her arm through Wei's, a gesture that was both performance for Hannah and a desperate anchor for herself. Hannah, oblivious, saw only a warm reunion. "So, you two know each other well?" she asked Jian. Jian opened his mouth, then closed it, glancing at his CEO clinging to the arm of a man he knew as a janitor. He was cornered. "We've crossed paths," he managed. Hannah's sharp gaze turned to Wei. "May mentioned your background in facilities management. Such a critical role." The question landed like a bomb. This was the moment their lie could unravel. Wei met Jian's eyes briefly, a silent follow my lead, then turned to Hannah, his expression open. "Hannah," he said, his voice steady, "May's been kind about my role. But the truth is, that's not where I started." A deafening silence filled the penthouse. Hannah's smile stiffened. Jian looked like he might collapse. May held her breath. "When I joined the company," Wei continued, "I was in custodial services. The night janitor on the executive floor. That's how May and I met." May seized the moment, her voice warm, almost genuine. "It's true," she said, looking at Wei with practiced affection. "I'd see him late at night, working quietly while I was buried in reports. He was so steady, so unaffected by all this." She gestured at the opulent room. "He was the most real person I'd ever met." She gave a small, self-deprecating laugh. "I asked him out for tea. He turned me down 3 times. Jian's jaw dropped. The employment file in his head was no longer the issue, he was witnessing the office romance of the century. His confusion morphed into shock. "He said he didn't want to complicate his life," May continued, weaving truth into the fiction, especially with a young son at home. "So we kept it quiet, very quiet, for a long time. It's only recently that we decided," she trailed off, squeezing Wei's arm. The story was perfect, romantic, human, and just scandalous enough. It explained Wei's simple attire, his lack of corporate sheen, the secrecy, Jian's surprise. It transformed Wei from a liar into a man of principle and May from a cold CEO into a woman who valued heart over status. Hannah stared, processing the revelation. Then a warm, genuine smile spread across her face. She let out a soft laugh. "Well, I'll be," she said, shaking her head. "A janitor and a CEO." She looked at Wei, her respect visibly deepening. "You, sir, have better judgment than most of my board." She turned to May. "My dear, you are full of surprises, and I'm delighted by every one." The crisis passed. They hadn't just survived, they'd triumphed. The dinner was a triumph. The Singaporean investors were enchanted by the tale of the company's unlikely romance. Li, relaxed and confident, shared facts about Bao with the guests. Jian, sipping his sake, regarded Wei with newfound respect and a hint of unease. After the guests left, leaving a warm hum in their wake, the 3 stood in the living room. The stage department felt different now, infused with the truth of the evening's performance. Li, exhausted, slept curled up in Wei's armchair, Bao tucked under his arm. The adrenaline faded, leaving a quiet intimacy. May looked at Wei as he gently draped the woven blanket over her son. She no longer saw a janitor or a fake partner but a man who'd navigated an impossible situation with grace and cunning. He hadn't just saved her lie, he'd told a truer story. "Wei," she said softly in the quiet room. "Who are you?" Wei looked at the woman whose empire he'd just preserved with a story about being a janitor. Her question lingered, simple yet profound. He stepped to the armchair where Li slept, his small chest rising steadily. Wei adjusted the blanket, his hand resting briefly on the boy's hair. "I'm Kai's dad," he said, his voice low, not turning to face her. "And I'm the guy who fixes things when they're broken." He met her gaze, his eyes carrying a quiet weariness, free of judgment. "That's the whole story." Mei shook her head. "No, it's not." She stepped closer, her heels silent on the rug. "What you did tonight wasn't fixing something. It was building something from nothing. From a lie. The best stories have truth in them," Wei said. "You love your son. You were scared of failing him. I used that." They stood in the quiet, surrounded by remnants of the party, a few sake cups, a plate of half-eaten dumplings. Without speaking, they began cleaning, moving around each other in a comfortable, unspoken rhythm. Mei, who outsourced every detail of her life, found herself washing cups while Wei stacked plates. The silence was that of comrades after a battle, partners after a long day. "The board meeting's Friday," Mei said, her back to him as she placed a cup in the dishwasher. "Hannah called after she left. My contract extension's a formality." She was thrilled. "She loves our story." "That's good," Wei said. "It's what you wanted." "Yes," Mei said, drying her hands and turning to face him. "So after Friday, the deal's done, I suppose. You can take your armchair back." It was a statement, but it carried a question, fragile and hopeful. Wei looked at the armchair, at Li curled within its worn embrace. He pictured hauling it out, leaving an empty space in the room. He thought of Li waking to find the chair, his safe haven, gone. "He feels safe with you," Mei said, her voice a whisper, as if reading his thoughts. "He's never been this calm, this happy." Her CEO armor was gone, leaving a raw, vulnerable mother. The lie worked on Hannah. But the truth, Wei, the truth is it's working on him. This was the new complication. The goal was achieved, the threat neutralized. But in crafting the lie, they'd built something real and fragile. To dismantle it now would hurt Li. "What are you saying, Mei?" Wei asked, needing her to say it. "I'm saying maybe we keep it going," she said, her eyes pleading. "Not for the board, not for Hannah, for him. Until he's stronger. Until I'm better at this." Wei walked to the window, gazing at the city's flickering lights. His quiet life with Kai was within reach, he could return to their small apartment, their simple routines. But he thought of Li, of the trust in his eyes during their secret game. He'd shown this boy what a father's presence felt like. He couldn't just walk away. He had to keep showing up. "Okay," he said, turning back. "For Li." A single tear slid down Mei's cheek. She brushed it away quickly. "Okay." 3 months later, the penthouse was unrecognizable. The staged clutter had given way to the genuine mess of a real family. Saturday morning sunlight streamed through the windows, catching dust motes in the air. In the kitchen, Wei, in a faded t-shirt and jeans, flipped red bean pancakes, the air thick with the scent of sesame oil and syrup. On the living room floor, Kai and Li were deep in a sprawling project, building a city from every building block they owned. Li explained the physics of a cantilevered bridge for their lunar base, while Kai insisted it needed more glowing blue tiles. Their playful arguing filled the room with a warm, constant hum. Mei sat at the kitchen island, dressed in loose sweatpants and one of Wei's faded sweatshirts, her hair pulled into a messy bun. She cradled the chipped no tea, no talk mug, steam rising from the jasmine tea inside. She wasn't checking her inbox or reviewing contracts. She was watching her son and his brother, their heads bent over their sprawling block city, arguing about whether a spaceship needed more red tiles for aerodynamic flair. She was watching her family. "You're getting good at this," Wei said, sliding a plate of red bean pancakes in front of her. "This doing nothing thing." Mei smiled, a genuine smile that warmed her eyes. "It's harder than it looks. More complex than a corporate merger." "I know," Wei said, leaning against the counter beside her. "The stakes are higher." They watched Li and Kai play. Li, no longer the quiet, guarded boy from the boardroom, was now a lively chatterbox, his shyness only surfacing in fleeting moments. He had a father figure who listened, who taught him how to fly a kite and tighten a loose scooter wheel. Later that afternoon, Mei found herself alone in her home office. The space was still sleek, with its glass desk and city views, but it had softened. On the desk sat the park photo, the real one Wei had taken, capturing her and Li sharing a quiet moment. Next to it was a lumpy clay bowl Li had made in art class, now holding her pens. She opened her desk drawer, and her fingers brushed a smooth, round stone. She pulled it out, the moon-shaped stone Kai had given her that first night at Wei's apartment. She'd slipped it into her pocket then, a secret reminder of a world she hadn't understood. Mei looked at the stone, then at the photo of her improbable, beautiful family. She walked to the window, gazing out at the city, the empire she'd fought to protect. For months, she'd feared losing it. Now, she saw she'd been fighting for the wrong kingdom. She set the stone on the corner of her desk, beside the photo, a quiet reminder of what truly mattered. The doorbell rang. It was Wei and the kids, back from the science museum. Li and Kai burst in, talking over each other about whether a velociraptor could outrun a cheetah. Wei followed, a knowing smile on his face. He met Mei's eyes, a silent understanding passing between them. They hadn't planned this, hadn't negotiated it. They'd started by pretending and then forgot to stop. They'd built a family the way you build a home, one messy, imperfect, honest piece at a time. The story of the CEO and the janitor was the one the world knew. But the story of Mei and Wei, of Li and Kai, was the one they lived, and it was a far better story.